And I am fresh off the picket lines in Seattle, where I joined 5,000 of my colleagues, and we walked out to demand a school system that our students deserve. And they said that we haven't been teaching for the last week, but I disagree. I disagree because I think we were teaching the greatest lesson we could ever teach to our students. I think we were teaching the greatest lesson we could ever teach to our city and to this nation, that solidarity can win, that collective struggle can achieve social justice. Because we walked out in a strike of the Seattle educators to fight for an incredible list of demands that went far beyond our paychecks and our benefits that we were justly fighting for, but was a whole collection of demands to improve the public education system in our schools. And you know what happened? The school board got together in their wisdom and decided that they were going to take the lead of the corporate education reformers. We know them as Bill Gates, the Walmart family that's invested billions in privatizing our schools and pushing high-stakes testing, the Eli Broad Foundation that's doing the same, using their wealth to reduce the intellectual and emotional process of teaching and learning to a single score that they can use to punish our children, to punish our teachers, and to punish the schools. And our school board, instead of listening to the educators standing up to try to transform and create a just school system, they listened to these corporate reformers, and they passed a resolution giving the superintendent the right to sue the teachers, to sue the heart and soul of our school system. And this is what they wrote in that decision. They said, quote, "A strike for any reason by district teachers or other personnel is harmful and damaging to the district, our students, and our community." These members of the school board didn't walk the picket line, you can tell, because actually the greatest community I've ever seen was created at the picket line at Garfield High School and at the schools all across the city when a group called Soup for Teachers formed. A parent who ran a soup business in Seattle started a Facebook page. And she said, "Who will join me in delivering food to the picket lines for our striking educators who are doing this for our students?" And 3,000 parents later, they reached every single school to deliver food and soup and sustenance and solidarity to the educators of Seattle to let them know that our struggle was their struggle. And why did they join us in this fight? They joined us in this fight because one of our central demands was a demand for caseload caps for our psychologists, for our counselors, for our speech and language pathologists, so that they could give the individual attention that our students deserve. You know, at Garfield High School, where I teach, we have 100 homeless students, right, in the glittering city of Seattle, right, in the shadow of Amazon and Microsoft and Boeing, right, and Starbucks, and how many other massive corporate behemoths can I name? And yet Seattle's biggest high school, our flagship high school, has 100 homeless students, and we have counselors that have 400 students on their caseload. How can they possibly give the individual attention, the social and emotional support that our students deserve with those caseloads? That's why we were on the picket line. We were on the picket line because we believe that Black Lives Matter, and we had a demand in the contract negotiation that we actually set up race and equity teams in every single high school and every single school across Seattle. 100% of schools would have a team to deal with the fact that the Department of Education found that black students are suspended at 4 times the rates of white students for the very same infractions, right? And that's why we were on the picket line, to demand Black Lives Matter. And I'm proud to say the Black Lives Matter movement came out with a statement saying, "Your struggle is ours. We stand with you 100% in the struggle for an equitable school system and against institutional racism." And I'm proud to say that in this struggle, we achieved something perhaps unprecedented in the history of the teachers' union movement across this nation. We were in a fight for the right for kids to play. And in fact, it's shameful that we have to do this, but a study came out in Seattle that showed that dozens of schools, elementary schools in Seattle, had less than 15 minutes of recess for the kids. And where were those schools? They were concentrated in the schools that served predominantly low-income students and students of color, because they said, we have to raise the test scores so those kids don't get to play. Those kids don't get the benefit of the social and emotional development that you get when you solve problems on the playground together with your peers, rather than sitting in, filling in bubbles and eliminating wrong answer choices all day long. And so our union came to their aid and came to the demand that parents were making, and we actually bargained in 30 minutes of guaranteed recess in every school across Seattle. And perhaps I'm most proud because you heard that my high school was the first in the country to unanimously decide we were going to refuse to give one of these mind-numbing standardized tests, and we were going to turn towards real education, that we value teaching over testing. And when we took that stand 2 years ago, 7 other schools joined us in that fight, and it spread, and that rebellion convinced our union that they had to take a stand. And I am proud to say that in the current contract negotiations, the tentative agreement that was reached that will be voted on tomorrow, I got to fly back tonight. The tentative agreement that will be voted on tomorrow has 2 provisions around testing. Number 1, the district actually has to come to us with the testing schedule at the beginning of the year, and they can't add any high-stakes standardized tests in the middle of the year like they're used to doing. And number 2, not a single teacher in Seattle can be judged based on a student's standardized test score ever again. Where did this union power erupt? Well, I would suggest to you that you may have started this movement right here, and that your educators right here who walked out and who occupied the state capitol showed us the possibility of solidarity, of union struggle. So while you may be demoralized sometimes in the shadow of Scott Walker, know that that struggle was not in vain, and that the teachers in Chicago took up that struggle when they fought and struck in 2012, and that we have taken that struggle on now in Seattle, and that actually the struggle has just begun. I'm here to tell you all today that we are in the midst of the largest uprising against high-stakes testing in the history of the United States of America. It may have erupted in Seattle with the MAP test boycott at my high school and then spreading to 7 others, but it didn't stop there. What happened was students down in Portland walked out of the high-stakes testing, refusing to take it. And then in Chicago they walked out. And then in New York the teachers started refusing to give it. And then we saw the parents join this movement in a mass opt-out wave where last spring 200,000 families in New York State alone opted their kids out of these tests and said, my kid is more than a score. And what are they fighting for? Why are so many of these families rebelling against these high-stakes tests? Why did hundreds upon hundreds of students in New Mexico walk out of the test, predominantly Latino students marching in the streets against the new Common Core tests? right? Why is this rebellion reaching every corner of the country? I think it's because people know that education has to be a bedrock of a healthy community. I think it's because people know that we need an education system with a far bigger purpose than the narrow confines that those in the 1% have set up to make education. Their vision of education is about preparing young people to get positions as low-wage workers in their corporations, right? We have a whole different purpose of education because we know we face huge challenges in our world today. We know that we face endless war in our society today, right? Young people today who are my high school students have only known their entire life our nation bombing some other country and spending more to kill children in the Middle East than to educate them here at home. We face huge challenges in our world today, right? There is a mass incarceration system happening in this country to where there are more black people behind bars on probation or parole today than were slaves on plantations in 1850. That is a social catastrophe, and education has to have something to say about that problem, right? We have the war on women that was so eloquently described beforehand, and we have 1 in 4 women in the United States reporting having faced sexual assault in our country, and I think education has to have something to say about that. We have the worst economic inequality perhaps in the history of our country, where you have 400 people who have as much wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion people on the planet. That is a social catastrophe that education has to have something to say about, and I would suggest to you today that there perhaps is no greater challenge that we face than the possibility of the climate rising by 3 degrees. Because scientists will tell us that catastrophe could lead to runaway climate change that could be irreversible, and then the planet will no longer hold human life or life at all. And that is not a long-term prospect, but something that we face in the immediate future. And I would suggest to you that those are the real high stakes that we face in this country today, in our world today. That's why we're fighting to redefine public education. So I want to end today with the words of a student that contributed a chapter to the book that I edited and wrote for, called More Than a Score: The New Uprising Against High Stakes Testing. And I want to end with her words because I think they're indicative of the direction that young people are moving in a new uprising. And this young woman, Amber, was a student in the New York State public schools, and she was a valedictorian in her class. And when she was getting ready to graduate, the principal approached her and said, "You have to give the graduation speech, you're the valedictorian." And she said, "Absolutely not. I am not a public speaker. I don't have anything to say. I'm not going to do it." And the principal said, "Well, it's not that you have to do it, but it's that you would be shaming your family and the entire school and the community if you don't." So Amber relented. Maybe the principal might have regretted putting the pressure on her to give this speech, but she relented. And the first sign that this wasn't going to be your ordinary graduation speech was the title of the speech that was in the program that all the hundreds of assembled families got as they saw her approach the podium. And the title of the speech was 518-455-4767, which was the phone number of the state representative who was pushing high-stakes testing in the school system. Brilliant. And You have to read the entire speech, but I'm just going to excerpt a small portion of what she had to say at this graduation ceremony. And she said this: "As for the argument that the assessments are challenging our students more, sure, that's true. It's a challenge to fit the same amount of material into 1 year with more exams. It's a challenge to memorize loads of facts in time for the next test. It's also a challenge to eat a teaspoon of cinnamon in one bite without choking. But what are you really accomplishing?" At this point, I'd like to throw a slightly relevant quote by a famous person into the mix to make my speech seem more legitimate. That appears to be how these things work. So, Albert Einstein once said, "Everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid." We can't judge someone's intelligence by how well he does in a small group of isolated classes. Everyone learns differently, so education is not something that can be successfully standardized. She goes, one last part that you got. She goes on to say, "Anyway, this is why I tried so hard to get out of this speech. Not because I don't respect you all, I do. It's just that valedictorian is a label and I don't respect what it stands for. I am not the smartest person in our class. I could learn something new from every single one of you. I'm good at memorizing things, but that's not so useful outside of the standardized world of high school. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you have been more successful than I was, unless your standard for judging success is a Scantron sheet." The teachers and educators across this country are in a struggle to reclaim public education, to stop the privatizers, and to develop schools that unleash critical thinking, that unleash creativity, that unleash imagination. And those are going to be the skills that help our young people rise up and reclaim and fight back and transform this country and build solidarity across the world to stand up to the richest 1% who are trying to take everything from us. But the only power they have is in what they have in their wallet. And the power we have is the power of educators and parents and students in collective struggle. Thank you so much for having me.